He didn't just hand my son a pencil, he handed him a label. My family laughed like it was harmless, unaware I was about to decide if his $62 million empire collapsed by Monday. But the real shock didn't come from the cruelty. It came from my son, holding that cheap yellow pencil like evidence. My name is Evelyn Sanders, and if there is one thing I have learned in 41 years of navigating the treacherous currents of high-stakes capital and low-stakes family drama, it is that the loudest person in the room is usually the most leveraged. I stood in the shadow of a sprawling oak tree, a glass of sparkling water sweating in my hand, and watched the performance unfold. This was not a party, it was a production. The setting was a manicured backyard in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where the grass is cut at 45-degree angles and the fences are high enough to hide secrets, but low enough to invite envy. It was early June, and the humidity was already clinging to everything like a second skin. The air smelled of expensive hickory charcoal and the cloying sweetness of aggressive floral arrangements. White linens draped over rented round tables snapped softly in the warm breeze, and silver trays of catered hors d'oeuvres circulated in the hands of servers who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. My son, Noah, stood near the patio doors. He was 18 years old today, or close enough to it, and he was still wearing his graduation cap and gown. The polyester fabric had to be stifling in the 90-degree heat, but he did not take it off. He knew the rules. He had to keep it on for the photos. I watched him from a distance, my heart doing that slow, heavy ache that only mothers know. Noah had the kind of face that disappeared in crowds, not because he lacked presence, but because he lacked the desperation to be seen. He had my dark hair and his father's gentle chin, a combination that made him look younger than he was. He was smiling, but I knew that smile. It was the polite, practiced grimace of a boy who had spent his entire childhood being overlooked by the very people who were now patting him on the back. "Evelyn, you look serious," a voice chirped. I turned to see Aunt Linda, a woman who measured affection in Facebook likes. She was balancing a plate of shrimp and a glass of Chardonnay, her face flushed with the heat and the alcohol. "Just watching, Linda," I said, keeping my voice even. "It is a big day." "Oh, huge," she said, spraying a fine mist of wine as she spoke. "We are so proud of him. I always told Mike," I said, "that boy is a sleeper. He's going to surprise us." I took a sip of my water to hide my expression. That was a lie. Linda had not mentioned Noah's name in 3 years, not since he quit the football team to join the robotics club. Back then, the family consensus was that Noah was soft or weird, now that he had a diploma in his hand and a party with open bar access. Suddenly everyone had been rooting for him since kindergarten. "Where is he off to again?" Linda asked, glancing over my shoulder at the buffet line. "Community college, right? The one off Henderson Road?" "He is taking some time to decide on his path," I said. It was the rehearsed line Noah and I had agreed upon. Keep it vague. Keep it simple. Give them nothing to attack. "Smart," Linda nodded, though her eyes glazed over. "Save the money. College is so expensive these days. $50,000 a year for what? A piece of paper?" She drifted away before I could respond, drawn by the arrival of a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops. I smoothed the front of my silk blouse. I had paid for this blouse myself, just as I paid for my car, my condominium downtown, and the tuition for the private preparatory school Noah had just graduated from. I was the anomaly in this family. While they chased appearances, I chased solvency as a senior risk assessment officer for Crestwell Capital. My job was to look at a glossy, beautiful business plan and find the rot hidden in the foundation. I was paid to see the disaster before it happened, and right now, standing in my brother-in-law's backyard, I was seeing red flags everywhere. I looked for my sister, Jenna. She was over by the bar, frantically rearranging a stack of napkins that were already perfectly straight. Jenna was 2 years younger than me, but today she looked 10 years older. Her blonde hair was pulled back too tightly, stretching the skin at her temples, and her eyes were darting around the yard with the hypervigilance of a prey animal. She caught my eye and offered a quick, tight wave. It wasn't a greeting, it was an apology. Jenna had been looking at me with that apologetic expression for 15 years, ever since she married Kyle Maddox. She apologized for his lateness, she apologized for his jokes, she apologized for the way he borrowed money and forgot to pay it back. Today, her body language was screaming that she was preemptively sorry for whatever was about to happen. I walked over to her, my heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. "The party is beautiful, Jenna," I said, placing a hand on her rigid forearm. She flinched, then relaxed. "Is it? I was worried about the flowers. Kyle wanted the lilies, but I thought they looked too funereal. Do they look funereal, Evelyn?" "They look expensive," I said. "And the food is excellent." "Kyle ordered the platinum package," Jenna whispered, looking toward the house. "He said we had to go all out. For Noah?" I stiffened. Kyle did not do things for Noah. Kyle did things for Kyle. If he ordered the platinum package, it was because he wanted the neighbors to see the catering van in the driveway. "Where is the host?" I asked. Jenna bit her lip. "He is on a call." "Big development thing. You know how it is. The Maddox Ridge project?" I knew exactly how it was. I knew more about the Maddox Ridge project than Jenna did, and certainly more than Kyle thought I knew. I knew that the bridge loan was up for review. I knew that the liquidity ratios were looking thin, but I kept my face neutral. "He will be out soon," Jenna said, her voice pitching up. "He has a speech prepared. He is really excited to give Noah his gift." "A gift?" I asked. "Yes, he has been talking about it all week." Jenna picked up a napkin and started shredding it with her manicured nails. "Evelyn, please, just let him have his moment. For me? I know he can be a lot, but he is trying." I looked at my sister. Really looked at her. She was wearing a dress that cost $400. Standing in a house that was appraised at $800,000, and she looked like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. "I am not here to cause a scene, Jenna," I said softly. "I am just here for my son." "Right. Of course." She exhaled, a ragged sound. "I just want today to be perfect." I left her at the bar and made my way toward Noah. The yard was filling up. My cousins, the ones who sold insurance and leased luxury cars they couldn't afford, were clustering around the coolers, laughing too loudly. The air was thick with the sound of ice clinking against glass and the drone of conversation that meant absolutely nothing. Noah was standing alone now, near the edge of the patio. He had taken off his cap, holding it by the tassel, running his thumb over the velvet fabric. He looked tired. "Hey, graduate," I said, stepping into his space. He looked up, and his face softened. The mask slipped, just for a second. "Hey, Mom, you okay?" "It is hot," he said, "and Uncle Mike just asked me if I plan to major in girls next year." I rolled my eyes. "Uncle Mike is an idiot. You are allowed to walk away from him." "I know. Noah glanced around the yard. "I just want to get through the cake cutting. Then can we go? Maybe get pizza?" "Pizza sounds perfect," I promised. "Give it 2 hours. We will do the mingling. Smile at the ants, and then we are out of here." Noah nodded, but his eyes drifted down to his hand. He was holding his phone, gripping it so tightly his knuckles were white. He checked the screen, tapped it once to wake it up, then shoved it quickly into the pocket of his gown as if he were afraid I would see it. "Waiting for a text?" I asked lightly. "No," he said, too quickly. "Just checking the time." I noted the lie but didn't press it. Noah was a private boy. He had been guarding his phone like that for weeks, ever since the college acceptance letters started coming out. I assumed it was a girl, or maybe a rejection he didn't want to talk about. I trusted him. If he wanted to tell me, he would. "Well, brace yourself," I said, looking toward the house. "I think the curtain is going up." The sliding glass door to the kitchen slammed open. It wasn't a gentle slide. It was a breach. Kyle Maddox stepped onto the patio. He was a big man, occupying space with an entitlement that always made the room feel smaller. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a deliberate choice to emphasize his gym time, and a pair of aviator sunglasses that he did not remove. Despite the fact that he was standing in the shade of the awning, he held a Scotch glass in one hand, the amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Kyle didn't just walk. He strutted. He paused at the top of the 3 brick steps, scanning the yard. He was looking for eyes. He was waiting for the conversation to die down, for the attention to shift from the graduate to the host. All right. Kyle's voice boomed across the yard, projecting with the practiced cadence of a man who sold real estate developments to people who couldn't afford them. Let's get some energy in here. This is a celebration, not a library. The reaction was immediate and conditioned. The cousins cheered. Aunt Linda clapped. The atmosphere shifted from a lazy family gathering to a rally. Kyle fed off it, his grin widening, showing teeth that had been whitened to an unnatural shade of porcelain. I felt the old anger curl in my stomach, cold and heavy. It was a familiar companion. I had watched Kyle dominate this family for a decade. I had watched him talk over my father at Thanksgiving. I had watched him belittle Jenna's opinions until she stopped having them. I had watched him treat Noah like a prop, a background character in the Kyle Maddox show. He walked down the steps, bypassing his wife, bypassing the guests, and heading straight for the center of the lawn. He moved with the confidence of a man who believed the world was paved specifically for his Italian loafers. "Where is the man of the hour?" Kyle shouted. Taking a swig of his scotch, he lowered his sunglasses, peering over the rim. "Noah, get over here, kid." Noah stiffened beside me. He took a breath, put the polite smile back on his face, and stepped forward. "Go ahead," I whispered to Noah. "I am right here." Noah walked toward his uncle. He looked slight next to Kyle's bulk, the graduation gown making him appear even more fragile. Kyle threw a heavy arm around Noah's shoulders, pulling him in for a side hug that looked more like a headlock. "Look at this guy," Kyle announced to the crowd, squeezing Noah until the boy flinched. 18 years, graduated, finally done with the easy part, right? Laughter rippled through the yard. It was light, easy laughter, but it grated on my nerves. "I remember when this kid was afraid of his own shadow," Kyle continued, addressing the guests as if Noah wasn't standing right there. "Now look at him, ready to take on the world, or, take on whatever is available." More laughter. Noah's smile didn't waver, but I saw his eyes dip to the ground. I took a step forward, my hand tightening on my glass. I had a rule. I did not intervene unless it was necessary. I wanted Noah to learn to stand his ground, but Kyle had a way of pushing the line, testing the boundaries of decency under the guise of just joking. "We are all proud of you, Noah," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a mock-serious tone. "Seriously, it takes a lot to get a diploma these days. Participation is 90% of the grade, right?" He winked at Uncle Mike, who guffawed into his beer. "But seriously," Kyle shouted, raising his glass, "we are here to celebrate. And because I am the favorite uncle, don't deny it. I know the polls. I wanted to do something special. I wanted to give Noah a little advice, a little tool for the future." The yard went quiet. This was the moment, the gift Jenna had been worried about. Kyle reached into his jacket pocket. He did it slowly, theatrically. He wanted everyone to lean in. He wanted the suspense. I watched Noah. He was looking at Kyle's hand with a mixture of hope and dread. That was the tragedy of it. Part of Noah still wanted his uncle's approval. Part of him still hoped that maybe, just this once, Kyle would do something kind. I saw Noah's hand drift toward his pocket again, touching the phone hidden there. It was a reflex, a grounding mechanism. Kyle withdrew his hand from his pocket. He kept his fist closed. "Now," Kyle said, turning to face Noah fully, "you are going into the real world. You are going to community college. And hey, That is fine. Not everyone is cut out for the Ivy League. Not everyone is built for the pressure. Some people need a slower pace. The insult was wrapped in a compliment, delivered with a smile. I felt my pulse tick up. So, Kyle said, I got you something that I think represents exactly where you are heading, something that matches your ambition. He held his fist out. Noah reached out, his palm open. The air in the backyard felt suddenly heavy, the humidity pressing down on us. I didn't like the look in Kyle's eyes. It was too bright, too cruel. Kyle opened his hand. It wasn't a car key. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a watch. It was a pencil, a standard, yellow, number 2 pencil. It wasn't even sharpened. I stared at it. The guests stared at it. For a second, nobody understood. Then Kyle laughed. It was a bark of a sound. "This is all you deserve," Kyle said, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the yard. "Community college does not need a laptop, right? Just write your name and try to spell it correctly." He dropped the pencil into Noah's open hand. "Speak up, pencil boy," Kyle said, grinning at the crowd. "Tell everyone thank you." And then, the laughter started. It started with Uncle Mike, then spread to the cousins, and finally, ripple by ripple, the rest of the family joined in. They laughed because Kyle was laughing. They laughed because it was easier than silence. I did not laugh. I stood perfectly still, the condensation from my water glass dripping onto my thumb. I looked at my son, holding that cheap piece of wood like it was a grenade. I looked at my sister, who was staring at her shoes. And then I looked at Kyle Maddox. He was beaming. He was soaking it up. He thought he had won the room. He had no idea that my phone was vibrating in my clutch. He had no idea that in about 40 minutes, the credit committee at Crestwell Capital was convening to discuss the fate of the Maddox Ridge development. And he certainly had no idea that the woman he had just insulted by proxy was the one holding the pen that could sign his death warrant. I took a slow breath, tasting the charcoal and the humidity. I set my glass down on a nearby table. The ice settled with a sharp clink. It was time to ruin the party. The humidity in the backyard seemed to spike the moment Kyle Maddox decided he did not have enough of an audience. He was not satisfied with the polite circle of immediate family standing near the patio. He wanted the cousins by the cooler, the neighbors lingering near the fence, and the friends of friends who were only there for the free alcohol. He turned his back to Noah for a split second, pivoting on his heel like a ringmaster, and raised his voice to a level that cut through the low hum of conversation and the ambient noise of the cicadas. "Hey, can I get some eyes over here?" Kyle bellowed. Clapping his hands together, the sound was sharp, aggressive, demanding. "Back tables. Miller family. Put the sliders down for a second. I got something special for the graduate." The chatter died out instantly. It was that conditioned reflex I had watched for years when Kyle spoke. The ecosystem of the family paused to see what he would do next. It was rarely out of respect. It was usually out of a morbid curiosity. The way people slow down to look at a fender bender on the highway, they wanted to see if there would be wreckage. I watched my son. This was the moment that broke me, the image that would stay burned behind my eyelids long after the sun went down. When Kyle said the words, "something special," Noah's face changed. The guarded, polite mask he had worn all afternoon dissolved. In its place was a flash of genuine, naked hope. It was a look I hadn't seen on his face since he was 10 years old. Back before he realized that his uncle's affection was a currency he could never afford. His eyes widened slightly, and his shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch. He looked at Kyle not with suspicion, but with a desperate, silent plea. "Be good to me. Just this once. Be good to me." It was the kind of hope that makes a mother both proud of her child's resilience and terrified of his innocence. Noah wanted to believe that the graduation gown mattered. He wanted to believe that the milestone of surviving high school had finally earned him a seat at the table. Kyle saw that hope. I know he saw it because his grin widened, stretching the skin around his eyes. He fed on it. He let the silence stretch out. holding the moment hostage. He made a show of patting his jacket pocket again, ensuring every single eye was locked on his hand. He balled his right hand into a fist and held it up at shoulder height, like a magician about to produce a dove. "Come closer, kid," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was still loud enough to reach the property line. "I really thought about this. I thought, what does a guy like you really need for the next chapter?" Noah took a half step forward. He was trembling, just a little. You had to be his mother to see the vibration in his hands. "I thought about a car," Kyle said, and a few people chuckled. "I thought about a watch." He paused for effect. He was enjoying the rhythm of it. He was building a tower just so he could kick it over. "But then I remembered where you are going," Kyle said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper. "I remembered that you are taking the scenic route, the easy route." The air in the yard shifted. The smile on Noah's face faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching as he tried to hold the expression. "So," Kyle said, "open your hand." Noah obeyed. He held out his palm, flat and trusting. Kyle brought his fist down slowly, hovering over Noah's hand. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he splayed his fingers open. The object fell with a light, insignificant clack against Noah's skin. It was a pencil. It was not a silver fountain pen. It was not an engraved stylus. It was a plain, yellow, number 2 pencil. It was unsharpened. The flat wooden tip, blunt and useless. The pink eraser at the top was slightly gray, as if it had sat in a junk drawer for 3 years before being retrieved for this specific punchline. For a heartbeat, there was total silence. The object was so small, so mundane, that the guests in the back rows strained to see what it was. Then Kyle delivered the line he had probably been rehearsing in the mirror all morning. "This is all you deserve," he said. He let the words hang there, heavy and suffocating. "Community college does not need much, right?" Kyle added, looking around at his audience, inviting them in. "You don't need a laptop to fill out a coloring book. Just write your name legibly and try not to eat the lead." The laughter started as a nervous titter from the group near the bar, but it spread fast. It was careless, jagged laughter. It was the sound of people realizing that the joke was at someone else's expense, and therefore, they were safe. Someone near the buffet line clapped, a slow, rhythmic applause that felt less like appreciation and more like the jeering at a comedy roast. I watched the family I had known my entire life. I saw my cousin Mark throw his head back, laughing so hard he spilled his beer. I saw Aunt Linda cover her mouth, her shoulders shaking, her eyes bright with amusement. They weren't laughing because it was funny. There is nothing inherently funny about handing an 18-year-old boy a pencil and telling him he is worthless. They were laughing because Kyle was the sun they orbited, and gravity dictated that when the sun flared, you burned with it, or you got cast out into the cold. Noah stood frozen. He did not pull his hand back. He stared at the yellow pencil resting on his palm as if it were a foreign object he didn't know how to operate. The hope that had been on his face 10 seconds ago was gone. Extinguished so completely, it was as if it had never existed. In its place was a terrible, hollow stillness. He slowly curled his fingers around the pencil. He gripped it so tightly that I could see the blood draining from his knuckles, turning the skin the color of old parchment. He didn't look up. He just stared at his own hand, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. Kyle wasn't done. The laughter was his drug, and he hadn't hit the high yet. He leaned in closer to Noah, invading his personal space. His face inches from my son's ear, but his voice pitched for the crowd. "Speak up, pencil boy," Kyle said. The nickname was new. It was cruel. It reduced my son to the prop he was holding. "Tell the family thank you," Kyle goaded, grinning at the guests. "We want to make sure you learned manners, even if you didn't learn calculus." The laughter swelled again. This time it was louder, bolder. The initial shock had worn off, and now the crowd had settled into the rhythm of the humiliation. They accepted the premise. Noah was the failure. Kyle was the success, and this was just the natural order of things being reinforced. I stood by the table, my hand resting on the cool condensation of my water glass. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, not the heat of anger, but the cold clarity of a judge passing a sentence. I looked at Jenna. She was standing 10 feet away from her husband. Her eyes fixed on the ground, her face pale. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't moving either. She was paralyzed by the mortgage, by the country club membership, by the sheer force of Kyle's personality. She was choosing survival over loyalty. I looked at the others. These were the people who had sent birthday cards. These were the people who had come to Christmas dinners, and in the span of 30 seconds, they had all made a choice. They chose the entertainment. They chose the loud man with the microphone over the quiet boy with the dignity. They chose to be spectators at an execution because it was easier than stepping in to stop the blade. Noah finally looked up. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Kyle. His expression wasn't angry. It was something far worse. It was resigned. He offered a small, frozen smile, a grotesque mimicry of the polite expression he had been taught to wear. It was the smile of a person who realizes that fighting back only extends the beating. "Thanks, Uncle Kyle," Noah said. His voice was quiet, barely audible over the chuckling crowd. "I will use it." "You bet you will," Kyle shouted, slapping Noah on the back hard enough to make him stumble forward a step. "Maybe sketch me a picture of my house someday. That way you can say you own property." Kyle turned back to the crowd, arms wide, soaking in the adulation. He looked like a gladiator who had just slain a lion, except the lion was a teenage boy who had never raised a hand against him. I felt the glass in my hand tremble. The water inside rippled. My vision tunneled until the only thing I could see was the back of Kyle's navy blue suit jacket. I could see the expensive stitching. I could see the way the fabric pulled tight across his shoulders. He thought this was the end of the scene. He thought he had established the hierarchy for the afternoon. He thought he could turn back to his scotch and his admirers and forget that Noah existed. But he had made a miscalculation, a fatal one. He assumed that because Noah was quiet, he was weak. And he assumed that because I was a woman who worked in finance, I was just someone who balanced checkbooks and filed tax returns. He didn't know that my entire career was built on identifying weak assets and liquidating them before they could infect the portfolio. I watched Noah slip the pencil into his pocket. He patted it once, a subconscious gesture, like checking for a wallet. Then he looked at me. Our eyes locked across the 20 feet of manicured lawn. There were no tears in his eyes, just a question. He was waiting to see what I would do. He was waiting to see if I was like Jenna. If I would look at the ground and pretend this was just a joke I didn't understand. I didn't look at the ground. I didn't look away. I held his gaze, and then I slowly, deliberately, picked up my phone from the table. The screen was dark, but I tapped it once. The time was displayed clearly. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. The committee meeting was in 15 minutes. I looked back at Kyle, who was now laughing with Uncle Mike, reenacting the way he had dropped the pencil. He was miming the motion, his hand opening and closing, his face twisted in mocking delight. I realized then that I wasn't just angry. Anger is hot. It burns out. This was cold. This was absolute. I was going to destroy him. I was not going to make a scene. I was not going to scream. I was not going to throw a drink in his face like some reality television star. Those things were messy. Those things were emotional, and emotions, as I told my junior analysts, were liabilities. I was going to use the truth. I was going to use the very thing Kyle despised. Details, paperwork, accountability. "Evelyn?" Jenna had drifted over to me. Her voice was a whisper, trembling with that perpetual apology. "He didn't mean it," she said, though she couldn't even look me in the eye. "It is just his sense of humor. You know how he is. He thinks it builds character." I turned to my sister. I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew. Deep down, she knew that what had just happened wasn't a joke. It was a dissection. "I know exactly how he is. Jenna," I said. My voice was calm. It sounded like my voice in the boardroom. Flat, affectless, deadly. And I think it is time everyone else knew, too. What do you mean? She asked, her hand fluttering to her necklace. I mean, I said, slipping my phone into my palm. That character is about to become very expensive. I stepped away from the table. I didn't rush. I walked with the same measured pace I used when entering the 34th floor conference room at Crestwell Capital. The grass muffled my heels. The smell of barbecue sauce and expensive cologne hung in the air. Kyle was still holding court in the center of the yard. He didn't see me coming. He was too busy being the king of his own little dirt pile. He didn't know that the ground under his feet had already been sold. The vibration of my phone was not a ring. It was a singular surgical slice through the humidity of the afternoon. It buzzed against the palm of my hand. A sharp, haptic demand that ignored the graduation party, the smell of charcoal, and the lingering echo of my family's laughter. I looked down at the screen. The notification was stark white against the black glass. It was a message from Mara, my executive assistant at Crestwell Capital. Mara did not text on weekends unless the building was burning down or a sovereign nation was defaulting on its debt. Emergency Credit Committee. 40 minutes, dial-in details attached. I unlocked the phone, my thumb moving automatically. I tapped the message to open the full thread. The subject line of the attached forwarded email stopped my breath in my throat. Subject: Maddox Ridge Development. Bridge loan extension / covenant breach warning. My gut dropped. A physical sensation of weightlessness that had nothing to do with the heat. I had been reviewing the Maddox Ridge file for 3 weeks. It was a sprawling residential project on the outskirts of the city, a portfolio of high-end condominiums that were supposedly 70% sold. In the sterile, air-conditioned silence of my office on the 34th floor, Maddox Ridge was just a collection of spreadsheets, PDF architectural renderings, and cash flow projections that looked optimistic to the point of delusion. It was file number 704-Bravo, but standing here in the grass, with the sound of Kyle's voice still booming across the yard. The abstraction of file 704-Bravo collapsed into the reality of the man standing 20 feet away from me. I tapped the attachment. The summary loaded. Principal: $62 million. Maturity date: today. Status: extension required immediately. The numbers stared back at me, clean and unforgiving. $62 million. It was a bridge loan, a high-interest, short-term instrument designed to carry a developer from the construction phase to the permanent financing phase. Bridge loans were dangerous. They were the financial equivalent of sprinting across a tightrope. If you made it to the other side, you were rich. If you stumbled, if you failed to secure the permanent financing by the maturity date, the bridge collapsed, and Kyle's bridge was crumbling. The email from the underwriting team was flagged red. Default covenants triggering at close of business Monday if extension is not granted. I understood the timeline instantly. This was not just a business meeting, it was a rescue mission. Kyle had likely been burning up the phone lines all morning, begging the relationship managers at Crestwell to push this meeting through, to get the extension signed before the computers automatically flagged the loan as non-performing on Monday morning. If that happened, the cross-default clauses would kick in. His other lines of credit would freeze. The construction crews would walk off the job. The liens would be filed. And Kyle Maddox, the man who had just handed my son a pencil as a lesson in humility, would be insolvent by sunrise. I looked up from the screen. The sun seemed brighter now, harsh and exposing. Kyle was still standing in the center of the patio, surrounded by a fresh group of admirers. He had moved on from Noah and was now holding court with my cousin Mark and a neighbor I vaguely recognized. Kyle was gesturing broadly with his Scotch glass, the ice clinking against the crystal. He looked invincible. He looked like a man who believed that the rules of gravity did not apply to him because he was wearing a $3,000 suit. He had no idea, to Kyle and to most of my family. The phrase "works in finance" was a catch-all term that meant nothing. They assumed I was a glorified accountant. They imagined I sat in a cubicle, filing tax returns, or approving car loans for Honda Civics. Kyle assumed that because I was a single mother who drove a Volvo and didn't wear logos on my handbags, I was a functionary. He thought I was the person who fetched the coffee for the people who mattered. He did not know that I was one of 5 people on the senior credit committee. He did not know that for loans over $50 million. My signature was not just required, it was decisive. He did not know that I was the risk officer assigned to the Midwest commercial real estate portfolio. I was the person who mattered. I watched him throw his head back and laugh at something Mark said. It was a loud, wet sound. He clapped Mark on the shoulder, a gesture of benevolent superiority. He was playing the role of the tycoon, the local kingpin who deigned to mix with the commoners. I shifted my gaze to Jenna. She was standing at the edge of the circle, looking small. She reached out and touched Kyle's elbow, whispering something to him. I saw her lips move. Please, Kyle, enough. Kyle didn't even look at her. He shrugged her hand off his arm with a twitch of his shoulder. Emotion so dismissive it made my teeth ache. He didn't break his conversation with Mark. He treated his wife, my sister, like background noise, like a buzzing fly that was momentarily annoying but ultimately irrelevant. The anger I had felt earlier, the cold, judicial clarity, hardened into something like steel. This was no longer just about the pencil. The pencil was a symptom. The disease was a profound, unchecked arrogance that had convinced Kyle Maddox he could treat people like debris and suffer no consequences. He believed he was immune. He believed his empire protected him, but his empire was built on a loan that I held in my hand. I looked at the time again. 38 minutes until the call. I did not need 38 minutes. I needed 5. I slid my phone into the side pocket of my dress. I smoothed the fabric over my hip. The movement was automatic, a habit from years of walking into boardrooms where I was the only woman and often the only person telling the CEO no. I started to walk. I did not rush. Rushing signals panic. Rushing suggests you are reacting to the situation rather than controlling it. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. My heels did not sink into the grass. I kept my weight forward, moving with a predator's grace. The sounds of the party began to fade as I focused on my target. The clatter of silverware, the thrum of the bass from the speakers, the chatter of the guests, it all became white noise. The only thing that was real was the distance closing between me and the man who had tried to humiliate my son. As I approached the patio, I saw Noah. He was sitting on a retaining wall near the rose bushes, still wearing his cap and gown. He was turning the yellow pencil over and over in his fingers, studying it. He looked up as I passed him. He saw my face. Noah knew me better than anyone. He knew the mom face, soft, tired, affectionate, and he knew the work face. He had seen it on the rare occasions he came to my office, watching me dismantle a subordinate's poor argument over the phone. His eyes widened. He sat up straighter. He didn't say a word, but he stopped spinning the pencil. He recognized the shift in atmospheric pressure. I stepped onto the patio bricks. The sound of my heels changed from a soft thud to a sharp, authoritative click. Kyle was mid-sentence. So I told the contractor, "Look, you want to get paid. You finish the framing. I don't care if it is raining. You are not made of sugar, right?" He laughed at his own toughness. Mark laughed with him. I stopped 3 feet away from him. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, waiting. Silence is a power move. Most people are uncomfortable with it. They rush to fill it with noise. Kyle sensed the presence behind him. He turned, his smile still in place, ready to welcome another fan. When he saw it was me, the smile didn't disappear. But it changed. It became patronizing. It is just Evelyn's smile. "Evelyn!" he boomed, pivoting to face me. "Come to join the big kids? I was just telling Mark here about the new development. Maddox Ridge, going to be the jewel of the county." "Is it?" I asked. My voice was not loud. It was pitched exactly at the level of normal conversation, which forced the people around us to stop talking to hear me. The circle of cousins and neighbors quieted down. They sensed a confrontation. And like the vultures they were, they wanted to see the carcass. "Oh, absolutely," Kyle said, taking a sip of his drink. "We are 70% sold, waiting on the bank to finalize the next tranche of funding. But you know how banks are: red tape, bureaucracy, a bunch of people who have never built a doghouse telling us how to build skyscrapers." He winked at Mark. "Present company excluded. Of course, Evelyn, I know you work in, what is it? Accounts receivable?" He was baiting me. He wanted me to get defensive. He wanted me to list my credentials so he could scoff at them. I didn't blink. "I work in risk," I said. "Risk?" Kyle laughed. "Sounds exciting. What do you do? Tell people not to run with scissors?" The crowd chuckled. Jenna looked like she wanted to dissolve into the paving stones. She stepped forward, reaching for Kyle's arm again. "Kyle, maybe we should—" "It is fine, Jenna," Kyle said, cutting her off. He looked at me, his eyes dancing with amusement. "So, Evelyn, you come over here to thank me for the pencil? I know it is a lot to take in. Generosity can be overwhelming." "It was quite a gift," I said. My tone was dry, devoid of sarcasm, which made it harder to read. "I am a practical man," Kyle said, spreading his hands. "Why waste money on someone aiming low? You don't put premium gas in a golf cart, right?" He looked around for approval. He got a few nervous smiles, but the air was getting thinner. People were starting to realize that I wasn't backing down. I wasn't shrinking away like I usually did at family gatherings. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I held it casually, but I turned the screen outward, angling it just enough so that the glare of the sun didn't obscure the display. "I agree," I said. "Practicality is important," which is why I was surprised to see the file. Kyle frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his brow. "What file?" "The file I have been reviewing for 3 weeks," I said. I took a step closer. "The one with the deadline today." I saw the gears turning in his head. He was trying to connect the dots, but his arrogance was blocking the path. He couldn't conceive of a world where I had access to his business. "I don't know what you are talking about," he said, his voice losing some of its boom. "Maddox Ridge," I said. I let the name hang there. "Bridge loan, $62 million. Kyle froze. The glass in his hand went still. The smile didn't drop. It just kind of slid sideways, losing its structural integrity. "How do you know that number?" he asked. His voice was quieter now. "I know the number," I said, "because I am the one who has to decide if we extend it." I watched the color drain from his face. It was fascinating. Scientifically speaking, the blood vessels constricted, the capillaries emptied, and the ruddy complexion of the master of the universe turned into the pale, doughy paste of a man who realizes he has forgotten to wear his parachute. "You?" he sputtered. He laughed, but it was a breathless, jagged sound. You are at Crestwell. You are in the back office." "I am on the senior credit committee," I corrected him gently, "and we are meeting in 35 minutes, specifically to discuss your extension." The silence that fell over the patio was absolute. It was heavy and thick. The cousins stopped drinking. The neighbors stopped chewing. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Kyle looked at my phone, then at my face. He was looking for the bluff. He was looking for the tell. He wanted to believe I was lying, that I was just a bitter sister-in-law trying to score points. But he saw the truth. He saw it in the stillness of my posture. He saw it in the lack of emotion in my eyes. "My recommendation is due," I said. "And considering your views on, what did you call it? Aiming low? I thought we should discuss the practicality of your project." Kyle's eyes darted to the left and right. Checking who was listening, he realized, too late, that he had built an audience for his own execution. "Evelyn," he hissed, stepping into my personal space, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This is family. Do not bring business here." I didn't retreat. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You brought judgment here, Kyle," I said, my voice carrying clearly to the silent crowd. "I am just discussing investments. Since you love doing that so much." I saw Jenna put her hand over her mouth. She wasn't looking at Kyle anymore. She was looking at me, and her eyes were wide with a terrifying realization. She knew how much debt they were in. She knew the house, the cars, the party. It was all leveraged against that loan. And she just realized that the woman holding the axe was the one whose son had just been handed a pencil. The silence that followed my statement was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the sudden, suffocating pressure of a room where the oxygen has been sucked out. The investments line hung in the humid air between us, vibrating with a frequency that shattered the casual, beer-drinking atmosphere of the graduation party. I watched Kyle Maddox. I watched him with the dispassionate focus of a biologist studying a specimen under a microscope. For years, I had watched this man operate with the blustering confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was a man who believed that volume equaled veracity, that if he spoke loud enough and smiled bright enough, the world would bend to his will. He had built a life and an identity, on the premise that he could charm or bully his way out of any room. But he could not charm mathematics, and he certainly could not bully a credit committee. Kyle's smile, which had been plastered on his face like a billboard for success, began to stutter. It was a physical failure of the facial muscles. The corners of his mouth twitched, trying to hold the upward curve, but the skin around his eyes betrayed him. There was no mirth there. There was only a sudden, sharp intake of panic. He looked at the phone in my hand, then at my face, and then, instinctively, at the guests surrounding us. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the audience he had cultivated was now a liability. Okay, Kyle said. He let out a short, choked laugh that sounded more like a cough. He took a half step back, spreading his hands in a gesture that was meant to be disarming but looked frantic. "Evelyn, always the dramatist, right? Risk assessment. Sounds very serious, very grim." He turned to the crowd, sweeping his gaze over the confused faces of our relatives. "She is kidding, folks," Kyle announced. Though his voice lacked its usual resonant boom, it was thin, reedy. "Evelyn loves to talk shop, even at a party. Can't turn it off. Can we? It is like a tick." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to play along, to let him have this out. He wanted me to smile, to roll my eyes, to say, "Yes, just a joke, Kyle." He wanted me to restore the status quo where he was the alpha and I was the uptight sister-in-law. I did not smile. I did not blink. I stood perfectly still, my posture aligned, my breathing even. "I am not kidding, Kyle," I said. My voice was soft, but in the sudden quiet of the yard, it carried like a bell. "And neither is the bank. The covenants on the Maddox Ridge loan are not a joke. They are a contract, one that you are about to breach." The confusion among the guests rippled outward. Aunt Linda, standing near the punch bowl, frowned, tilting her head. Cousin Mark, who had been laughing the loudest just moments ago, lowered his beer bottle, looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match where the ball had suddenly turned into a live grenade. They didn't understand the vocabulary. Covenants, breach, bridge loan, but they understood the tone. They understood that the dynamic had shifted violently. They understood that the graduation prank had collided with something real, something that involved millions of dollars, and the impact was ugly. Kyle's face flushed a deep, mottled red. The humiliation he had tried to inflict on Noah was now rebounding, hitting him with the force of a boomerang. He stepped in close again, abandoning the performance for the crowd. He invaded my personal space, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. I could smell the scotch on his breath, mixed with the acrid scent of nervous sweat. "You listen to me," he hissed, the sound escaping through clenched teeth. "This is a party. This is family. You do not bring this business crap into my backyard. You do not embarrass me in front of these people." You embarrassed yourself, I replied, holding my ground. I didn't lean back. I didn't retreat. You handed my son a pencil and told him he was worthless. You did that. You made the choice to turn this afternoon into a performance of your own ego. I am simply providing the reality check you seem to be missing. I will call your boss, Kyle threatened, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. I know people at Crestwell. I play golf with Jim Halloway. I will tell them you are harassing a client. I will have your job. I almost laughed. The threat was so pathetic, so indicative of how little he understood my world. Jim Halloway retired 4 years ago. Kyle, I said calmly, and even if he were still there, he wouldn't be able to help you. This isn't about golf. This isn't about favors. This is about $62 million of exposure that you cannot cover. I lifted my phone again, turning the screen slightly so the glare of the sun didn't obscure the text. I wanted him to see it clearly. I wanted there to be no ambiguity. The committee meets in 30 minutes, I said. I am the lead risk officer on the file. That means I present the facts. I present the character assessment. I present the recommendation on whether to extend your lifeline or cut it. Kyle stared at the phone. He stared at his own name on the screen. The reality of it crashed into him. He wasn't dealing with a bank teller. He wasn't dealing with a loan officer he could dazzle with a steak dinner. He was dealing with me. You wouldn't, he whispered. Evelyn, come on. We are family. Jenna, think about Jenna. I am thinking about Jenna, I said. I looked past him to where my sister was standing. Jenna had not moved. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her fingertips were white. She looked like she might cry. But it wasn't the weeping of a woman whose party was spoiled. It was the terrified weeping of a woman who knows the avalanche has started, and she is standing at the bottom of the mountain. Jenna knew. She knew about the late-night phone calls. She knew about the second mortgage they had quietly taken out on the house. She knew that Kyle's empire was a house of cards held together by debt and bravado. And she knew, looking at my face, that I held the wind that could blow it all down. Jenna knows exactly what is at stake, I said to Kyle, keeping my eyes on his. She knows that if this extension is denied, the cross-default clauses trigger on Monday morning. She knows the personal guarantees you signed means they come for this house. They come for the cars. They come for everything. Kyle flinched as if I had slapped him. Shut up, he hissed. Keep your voice down. Why? I asked. You were so eager to speak up a minute ago. You wanted everyone to hear you. You wanted to make sure the people in the back row heard you call my son Pencil Boy. Why the sudden need for privacy? I was joking, Kyle snapped, his voice cracking. It was a joke. Noah knows it was a joke, right? Noah? He spun around, looking desperately for my son. Noah was still standing by the rose bushes. He hadn't moved. He was watching us with a level, unblinking gaze. He held the yellow pencil in his hand, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked enlightened. He was seeing his uncle not as a titan, but as a desperate man sweating through his suit. Noah didn't answer. He just watched. Kyle turned back to me, his eyes wild. Evelyn, please, you have to recommend the extension. We are close. We just need 3 months. 3 months and the pre-sales close. And we are in the black. I promise. Just do this for me. For you? I repeated. The words tasted like ash. You want me to risk my professional reputation, my fiduciary duty, and millions of dollars of my firm's capital for you? The man who thinks my son deserves nothing but a piece of wood? I will apologize, Kyle said quickly. I will tell him I was wrong. I will give him a job. I will hire him for the summer. 10 grand. Cash. I felt a surge of disgust so potent it almost made me nauseous. He thought everything was a transaction. He thought he could buy dignity. He doesn't want your money, Kyle, I said. And he certainly doesn't want to work for a company that is technically insolvent. The guests were beginning to murmur now. The spell of the joke was fully broken. They could see the sweat on Kyle's forehead. They could hear the desperation in his tone. even if they couldn't make out the words. The social chessboard had shifted. The king was in check, and he was running out of squares. "You are enjoying this," Kyle accused, his fear turning into malice. "You have been waiting for this. You are jealous. You are jealous that we have a life, that we have status, and you are just some lonely woman with a calculator." "I am not jealous, Kyle," I said. "I am thorough." I checked the time on my phone. 25 minutes, I said. "I need to find a quiet place to take this call. I need to review the file one last time. I need to look at the contractor invoices. I need to look at the liquidity ratios. And I need to decide if you are a good bet." I paused, letting the silence stretch again. "Based on the last 10 minutes, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Your character rating is not looking promising." Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was paralyzed. The realization that his fate rested in the hands of the woman he had consistently underestimated was too much for his brain to process. He stood there, mouth slightly agape, the Scotch glass tilting dangerously in his hand. I turned away from him. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. There was no rebuttal. As I walked away, I felt the eyes of the entire family on my back. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They weren't looking at me as the boring sister. They were looking at me with a mixture of awe and fear. They had seen the power shift. They had seen the moment the predator became the prey. I walked toward the house, my heels clicking on the patio stones. I passed Jenna. She looked at me, tears swimming in her eyes, her mascara starting to smudge. "Evelyn," she whispered. I stopped for a second. "I have to take this call." "Jenna." "I know," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Just do what is right." It was a strange thing for her to say. Do what is right. Not save him, not help us, but do what is right. It was the first honest thing she had said in years. I nodded and stepped through the sliding glass door, leaving the heat and the humidity behind. The kitchen was cool, air-conditioned, and quiet. It was a sanctuary of stainless steel and granite. I walked to the island and set my phone down. I pulled the chair out and sat. My hands were steady. My heart was beating slowly, rhythmically. I looked out the window. I could see Noah standing in the yard. He was looking at the house. He raised the pencil slightly, a salute to the invisible woman behind the glass. I wasn't done yet. The meeting was just the formality. The real work, the forensic dismantling of Kyle's lies, was about to begin. I had the file on my secure cloud drive. I had the vendor list. And I had the distinct feeling that the contractor delays Kyle was blaming for his financial woes were not due to rain or labor shortages. I tapped the screen to open the Crestwell app. I authenticated with my fingerprint. The Maddox Ridge file opened. I started to read. And as I scrolled through the cash flow statements, the anger I had held back for so long transformed into something useful. It transformed into evidence. Kyle Maddox wanted to talk about what people deserved. I was about to show him exactly what that meant. The sliding glass door was the only barrier between the air-conditioned sanity of the kitchen and the suffocating humidity of the patio. But it was not enough to block out the noise of revisionist history. Kyle had followed me to the threshold, unable to accept that his audience had walked away. He was still talking, his voice pitching between aggression and pleading, trying to reframe the last 10 minutes into something palatable. I sat at the island, the granite cool under my forearms, but my mind was not in the room. It was scrolling back, in my line of work. We call it trend analysis. You do not look at a single data point and call it a crisis. You look for the pattern. You look for the historical behavior that predicts the future default. And as I looked at Kyle through the glass, and past him to the family hovering uncertainly on the lawn, I did not just see a man handing a boy a pencil. I saw 4 years of systematic erosion. I replayed the tape. Freshman year. Noah had made the honor roll with a 4.0 grade average. We were at Thanksgiving dinner. My father had raised a glass to toast him. Kyle had waited for the clinking to stop before clearing his throat. They give those to everyone who shows up now, right? It is like a participation trophy for reading the book. The table had chuckled. Noah had lowered his glass. Sophomore year, the robotics state finals. Noah's team had placed second. He was beaming, holding a plastic trophy that meant the world to him. Kyle had ruffled his hair, utilizing that same condescending physical dominance he used today. Cute little project, kid, but let me know when you build something that actually makes money, like a toaster or a bomb. Aunt Linda had laughed so hard she choked on her stuffing. Junior year, the college search. Noah had mentioned he was looking at liberal arts schools, places with strong writing programs. Kyle had snorted, a wet, derisive sound. Not a real school, unless you're majoring in unemployment. You need a trade. Noah, or at least a degree you can pronounce, every single time. The mechanism was the same. Kyle would fire the shot, disguised as advice or humor. The target was always Noah's enthusiasm. The goal was always to make Noah feel small so Kyle could feel big, and every single time. The family had laughed. I looked out at them now. They were clustered near the buffet tables, pretending not to listen to the drama unfolding at the back door. Aunt Linda, Cousin Mark, Uncle Mike, even my own mother, God rest her soul, had done it when she was alive, smiling into her napkin, looking down, avoiding the conflict by endorsing the cruelty. They weren't bad people in the villainous sense. They didn't kick puppies. They paid their taxes. But they were cowards. They had learned that Kyle was a volatile element, a man whose ego was as fragile as it was enormous. To challenge him was to risk an explosion. To laugh with him was to buy safety. They traded my son's dignity for a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner. They traded his self-worth for an open bar at a graduation party. The complicity was in the micro-expressions. I saw Aunt Linda glance at Kyle, checking his face to see if it was safe to smile yet. I saw Uncle Mike nodding slowly, a reflex of agreement he probably didn't even realize he was doing. They were satellites programmed to orbit the biggest mass in the room, and for years, that mass had been Kyle Maddox. But gravity had shifted. I stood up from the island. The movement was sharp enough to make Kyle flinch in the doorway. "Evelyn," he started, his voice a low whine. "Come on, you are overreacting. It is a graduation roast. It is a tradition. It is a pattern," I said. I walked toward the door. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of him, forcing him to take a step back onto the patio. I stepped out with him. The heat hit me again, but I barely felt it. I looked past Kyle to the family. I made eye contact with Linda. She looked away. I looked at Mark. He pretended to inspect the label on his beer bottle. "It is just a joke," Kyle said again, louder this time, trying to rally his troops. "Right, guys. Noah knows I'm kidding. We have a rapport. He gets it." Kyle turned to look for Noah, needing that validation, needing his victim to sign the release form. Noah was standing by the rose bushes, where he had been for the last 20 minutes. He hadn't fled. He hadn't gone to his room to cry. He was watching us with a strange, new maturity. The pencil was still in his hand, but he wasn't gripping it like a weapon anymore. He was holding it loosely, like an artifact from a civilization he had outgrown. Noah took a step forward. The silence in the yard was absolute. Even the servers had stopped moving, sensing the shift in the air. "Jokes are supposed to be funny," Noah said. His voice was not loud. It wasn't angry. It was just a statement of fact, delivered with the flat, objective tone of someone reading a weather report. Jokes are supposed to be funny. It was devastating in its simplicity. It cut through the layers of social lubrication and family tradition and exposed the rot underneath. If it wasn't funny to the person being targeted, and it wasn't funny to the objective observer, then it wasn't a joke. It was bullying dressed up in a tuxedo. The energy in the yard snapped. I saw it happen. I saw the moment Cousin Mark realized that laughing wasn't the safe option anymore. I saw Aunt Linda's face crumble from forced amusement into genuine shame. They looked at Noah, really looked at him, and they realized that the shy kid they had ignored for 18 years had just outmaneuvered the loudest man in the room with 5 words. Kyle's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He opened his mouth, but he had no script for this. He was used to Noah taking it. He was used to Noah smiling that polite, pained smile. He wasn't ready for Noah to speak. "He is sensitive," Kyle stammered, pivoting back to me, trying to find an ally. "You coddled him, Evelyn. That is the problem. He can't take a little ribbing." "He took it for 4 years," I said, my voice cutting over his. "He took it when you mocked his grades. He took it when you mocked his hobbies. He took it today when you handed him a piece of garbage and called it a future." I turned my gaze to the wider group. I swept my eyes across the faces of my relatives. "And you watched," I said. "You didn't not know. You didn't misunderstand. You heard him. You saw Noah's face every single time, and you laughed." Aunt Linda flinched. "Evelyn, we didn't mean—" "You laughed because it was easier than telling Kyle to shut up," I continued. Relentless. "You laughed because you wanted to stay on the invite list. You chose your comfort over my son's confidence, and that makes you just as liable as he is." The shame in the air was palpable. It was heavy and thick. People started looking at their watches, looking at their feet, looking anywhere but at me or Noah. Kyle saw he was losing the room. He saw the admiration fading, replaced by judgment. He was a salesman, and he knew when a deal was going south. He needed to pivot. He needed to secure the asset, which, in this moment, was me. I was the one with the power to approve the extension. I was the one holding the $62 million grenade. He took a deep breath, composed his features into a mask of solemnity, and turned to me. He lowered his voice to a tone that was meant to convey intimacy and regret. "Evelyn," he said, placing a hand on his chest. "Look, maybe I went too far. I can admit that. I am a big personality. Sometimes I don't know my own strength. If I offended you, if I made you feel disrespect, I am truly sorry. You are family. You are important to us." It was a masterclass in non-apology. If I offended you, my own strength. You are important. It was political. It was slippery. It was designed to massage my ego while accepting zero accountability for the actual harm done. He was apologizing to the bank officer, not the mother. He was apologizing to the checkbook. I looked at him with zero warmth. "You didn't offend me, Kyle," I said. "You don't have the capacity to offend me. You are a line item on a spreadsheet to me right now." I pointed toward the rose bushes. "Not to me," I said. "To him." Kyle froze. He looked at Noah. The idea of apologizing to the pencil boy, to the kid he had bullied for sport, was clearly physically painful for him. It violated the hierarchy he had established in his own mind. But he looked at me again. He saw the phone in my hand. He saw the time. 10 minutes to the call. He swallowed hard. He turned his body toward Noah. He didn't walk over to him. That would have been too much. He stayed on the patio, maintaining the physical elevation of the steps. "Noah," Kyle said. His voice was stiff. "Your mom thinks I was a little rough on you. So hey, sorry if you took it the wrong way. We are just having fun, right? You know I want the best for you." It was rehearsed. It was hollow. It still sounded like he was doing Noah a favor by acknowledging his existence. "Sorry if you took it the wrong way." It was the classic abuser's refrain. The problem wasn't the action. The problem was the reaction. Noah didn't smile. He didn't say, "It's okay, Uncle Kyle." He just nodded. Once, a slow, deliberate acknowledgement that he had heard the words and weighed them for exactly what they were worth. 0. Kyle turned back to me, beaming, as if he had just performed a miracle. "There. Good? We are good?" He was desperate for the all clear. He wanted me to put the phone away. He wanted the threat to vanish, but the threat wasn't just me anymore. As he looked at me, grinning that fake, terrified grin, a light flashed in his jacket pocket. His phone buzzed. It was a long, aggressive vibration against the fabric of his suit. He ignored it. He kept his eyes on me. It stopped, then started again immediately. Buzz, 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 Then it stopped. Then it started again. Kyle's smile faltered. He patted his pocket instinctively, then pulled his hand away as if the phone were hot. "Aren't you going to answer that?" I asked softly. "It is nothing," Kyle said quickly. "Spam calls, telemarketers, you know how it is." "I don't think telemarketers call 3 times in 30 seconds on a Saturday afternoon," I observed. I knew who it was, or at least, I knew who it likely was. When a project is $62 million in the hole and the bridge loan is expiring. The sharks start circling. Contractors who hadn't been paid. The junior partners who were starting to panic. The other investors who had heard the rumors. The phone lit up again through the fabric of his pocket. A spectral blue glow that pulsed like a warning beacon. Kyle looked down at his pocket, then up at the guests, who were watching the phone vibrate with morbid fascination. He couldn't answer it. Not here, not in front of the people he had told that everything was booming. To answer that call was to let the reality in. "Just business," Kyle muttered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "It can wait." "Can it?" I asked. I looked at my own phone. 5 minutes. "Kyle," I said. "I am going to the kitchen. Do not follow me. Do not knock on the door. If you interrupt this meeting, I will move the recommendation from deny to accelerate repayment. Do you understand what that means?" He nodded. He understood. Acceleration meant they didn't just stop lending. They demanded everything back, now. "Good," I said. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on the family who had laughed. I turned my back on the humidity and the lies. I walked into the kitchen and slid the heavy glass door shut. I turned the lock. The click echoed in the silence. Through the glass, I saw Kyle standing there, alone in a crowd of people. His hand was clutching his pocket, where the phone was still buzzing, a silent, frantic rhythm that matched the beating of his heart. He looked at the door. He looked at me, and for the first time, he looked like a man who knew he was already dead. I pulled out the chair at the island. I sat down. I opened the file. Noah was right. Jokes are supposed to be funny, and what I was about to do to Kyle Maddox's balance sheet wasn't going to be funny at all. It was going to be tragic. I tapped the Join Meeting button. "This is Evelyn Sanders," I said to the empty room, waiting for the connection to establish. "Risk management. I am on the line." The silence of the kitchen was a physical relief, a sudden depressurization from the toxic atmosphere of the patio. The heavy glass door clicked shut, severing the connection to the heat, the humidity, and the sound of my brother-in-law's disintegrating social standing. Here, the air was cool, smelling faintly of lemon polish and the expensive coffee beans Kyle bought, but never learned how to brew properly. I walked to the kitchen island, the granite surface cold under my fingertips. I set my phone down next to the fruit bowl. The screen was dark, a black mirror reflecting the tension in my face. The committee call was dialed in, but I was on mute, waiting for the quorum to assemble. I had 4 minutes. In my world, 4 minutes is an eternity. It is enough time to crash a market, sign a deal, or dismantle a lie. The door slid open behind me, then closed again with a soft thud. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The footsteps were light, hesitant. "Mom?" I turned. Noah was standing by the refrigerator. He looked out of place in this kitchen, much like he looked out of place in this family. He was still wearing his graduation cap, the tassel listing to the left. In his right hand, he still held the unsharpened yellow pencil Kyle had given him. He held it not like a gift, and not like a weapon, but like a piece of evidence he had retrieved from a crime scene. "I am here, Noah," I said, my voice softening instinctively. "Are you okay?" "I am fine," he said. He walked over to the island and pulled out one of the high-backed stools. He sat down, placing the pencil on the granite countertop. It made a small, hollow sound. Click. He looked at the pencil, then at me. "Are you really going to do it?" "Do what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Ruin him," Noah said. He didn't say it with judgment, just with a kind of terrified curiosity. "Are you going to ruin him over a pencil?" I looked at my son. He was 18, but in that moment, he looked so young. He was trying to reconcile the mother who made him pancakes with the woman who had just threatened to foreclose on his uncle's life. It was a fair question, to the outside world, to the family whispering in the yard. That is exactly what it looked like. Petty revenge, a mother lashing out because her cub was poked. I opened my laptop bag, which I had left on the counter earlier, a habit Kyle used to mock. Who brings work to a party? Evelyn? But one that was now serving me well. I pulled out my tablet and woke the screen. The Maddox Ridge file was already open. Come here, I said, gesturing for him to lean in. Noah hesitated, then slid his stool closer. Look at this, I said, pointing to the column of figures on the screen. This is a cash flow statement for the development. Do you see these numbers? Noah squinted at the spreadsheet. They are big. Look at the dates, I instructed. Look at the vendor payments for the last 3 months. I scrolled down. March 15th, $150,000 to Apex Supply. March 22nd, $150,000 to Apex Supply. April 1st, another $150,000. So, Noah asked, he is buying supplies. Construction costs are never round numbers. Noah, I said gently. Lumber doesn't cost exactly $150,000. Concrete doesn't cost exactly $150,000. When you see round numbers, repeated over and over, exactly under the reporting threshold that triggers an automatic audit, you are not looking at business expenses. I looked him in the eye. You are looking at panic, I said. You are looking at someone moving money out of the project to pay for something else, maybe a personal debt, maybe another failed project, maybe the catering for this party. I swiped to the next tab. And look here, I said, pointing to the revised projections. Last week, he submitted a new forecast claiming that pre-sales had jumped by 40% in 2 days. 40%. In a market that is flatlining. Noah looked at the screen. Then back at the patio door where Kyle was still visible, pacing back and forth, clutching his phone. He is lying, Noah whispered. It wasn't a question. He is staging the numbers, I corrected. He is painting a picture of a healthy building on top of a sinkhole. If I sign that extension, I am not just being nice to family. I am letting him steal $62 million from my bank. I am letting him drag contractors and homebuyers into a pit he dug himself. I closed the tablet cover. The screen went black. So, to answer your question, I said, leaning back, no, I am not ruining him over a pencil. The pencil was just the moment everyone finally saw who he really is. It was the moment the mask slipped, but the rot? The rot has been there for years. Noah stared at the closed tablet. He processed this slowly, his analytical mind, the one Kyle mocked, working through the logic. He picked up the yellow pencil again, turning it over in his fingers. He thinks I am stupid, Noah said quietly. He thinks everyone is stupid, I said. He thinks confidence is the same thing as competence. He thinks if he talks loud enough, the math will change, but the math never changes. Noah nodded. He set the pencil back down on the table. He pushed it away from him, toward the center of the island, as if he were done with it, as if he were done with Kyle. I have to tell you something, Noah said. His voice had changed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet intensity. He reached into the pocket of his graduation gown, the same pocket he had been guarding all afternoon. The one I had assumed held a rejection letter or a secret text chain with a girl. He pulled out his phone. I didn't want to say anything outside, Noah said, unlocking the screen. Not with everyone there, not with him acting like that. He slid the phone across the granite toward me. I looked down. It was an email. The header was bold, featuring a crest I recognized instantly, a shield, orange and black, a tiger. Subject, offer of admission, class of 2030. My breath hitched. I looked closer. It wasn't just an offer of admission. I scanned the text, my eyes jumping over the words. Dear Mr. Sanders impressed by your academic record, distinct pleasure to offer you admission to Princeton University. And then, a second paragraph. Furthermore, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the Trustees Scholarship, which covers full tuition, room, and board for all 4 years of study. I stared at the phone. I blinked, sure that the heat and the stress were making me hallucinate. Princeton University, the Ivy League, the dream he had never even whispered aloud because he was too afraid of being mocked for reaching too high. And a full scholarship. Noah, I breathed. I looked up at him. Princeton? He offered a small, shy smile, the first genuine smile I had seen on his face all day. I got the email on Thursday. Thursday? I repeated. Noah, that was 2 days ago. Why didn't you tell me? Why did we let everyone believe you were going to community college? Because of him, Noah said. He tilted his head toward the patio door. If I told everyone, Noah said, his voice hardening, Kyle would have made it about him. He would have said he inspired me, or he would have made a joke about how I only got in because of a quota, or he would have said Princeton is for snobs. Noah looked down at his hands. I didn't want him to poison it, he said softly. I didn't want the family to laugh first, and then pretend to celebrate later. I wanted it to be mine, just for a little while. I wanted to know I did it without them. My heart broke and swelled at the same time. I reached across the island and covered his hand with mine. His skin was cool. He was so solid, so much stronger than I had given him credit for. While I had been worrying about protecting him from Kyle's bullying, Noah had been playing a completely different game. He had been building an escape tunnel right under their noses. Community college doesn't need much, right? Noah quoted Kyle's words from 10 minutes ago, a dry, ironic edge to his voice. He was right. I don't need much. Just a pencil and a ticket out of here. Oh, honey, I said, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back. This was not the time to cry. This was the time to fight. I am so proud of you. You have no idea. I know, Noah said. I knew you would be. That is why I felt bad hiding it from you. But I knew if you knew, you would want to tell people. You would want to defend me. I always want to defend you, I said. I know, he said. But I don't need you to defend me from him anymore. Mom, he is. He looked at the pencil on the table. He is irrelevant. Irrelevant. It was the most damning word he could have used. Kyle Maddox didn't matter. His jokes didn't matter. His pencil didn't matter. Noah had already surpassed him. Noah was leaving this toxic orbit and launching himself into a stratosphere Kyle could only dream of visiting. My phone buzzed on the counter. The committee call was starting. The automated voice announced that the meeting was now in session. I have to do this, I said, pulling my hand back. I have to finish this. I know, Noah said. Do it. He didn't ask me to stop. He didn't ask me to be merciful. He understood now. He had seen the numbers on the screen. He knew that what was happening to Kyle wasn't vengeance. It was gravity. Stay here, I said. It won't take long. I am not going anywhere, Noah said. He picked up his phone, looking at the acceptance letter again, anchoring himself in his own reality. I put my earpiece in. I tapped the unmute button on the screen. The noise of the kitchen faded away as the sterile, professional audio of the conference line filled my ear. This is Evelyn Sanders, I said, my voice steady, shifting instantly from mother to risk officer. I am present. Welcome, Evelyn, the chair's voice crackled in my ear. It was Robert Vance, the chief credit officer, a man who did not laugh at jokes and did not care about graduation parties. We are here to discuss the Maddox Ridge Bridge facility. File 704 Bravo. I understand we are up against a hard covenant deadline today. That is correct, I said. We have received a request from the borrower for a 90-day extension, Robert said. The relationship manager has flagged this as urgent. Evelyn, you have been reviewing the updated financials and the vendor packet. What is the risk management position? I looked at Noah one last time. He was looking at me. He gave me a small nod. I looked at the pencil on the table. Then I looked at the patio door, where Kyle was now frantically typing on his phone, likely sending one last desperate email to a loan officer who couldn't help him. "The risk management position," I began, my voice clear and cold, "is that the file is compromised." I saw Noah's eyes widen slightly. He heard the shift. He heard the steel. "I am uploading the vendor analysis now," I continued. "We are not looking at a liquidity issue. Robert, we are looking at a character issue, and the collateral is dissolving." The kitchen was quiet. The party outside was a silent pantomime of false cheer. But in here, between me and my son, the truth was finally being spoken. I was not just denying a loan, I was severing the limb to save the body. And Noah Sanders, the boy who was going to Princeton, sat there and watched his mother go to work. The voice in my earpiece was crisp, digitized, and devoid of humidity. It was the voice of Robert Vance, the chief credit officer at Crestwell Capital, calling from a climate-controlled boardroom in Manhattan, 500 miles away from the sticky heat of my brother-in-law's backyard. "Evelyn," Robert said, his tone carrying that specific frequency of impatient authority, "we have the file open. The committee is assembled. Legal is on standby." Legal. My eyes snapped to the notification bar on my laptop screen. A text message from Mara, my executive assistant, had just slid into view. Mara: "Be careful with this one. Legal is sitting in on the call. The general counsel is personally monitoring. This file is controversial." My stomach tightened. In the world of high-risk lending, controversial is a polite code word for radioactive. Usually, a bridge loan extension of $62 million is a routine administrative hurdle. If the building is going up and the pre-sales are steady, we sign the paper, collect our fees, and move on. For legal to be involved, and for the general counsel to be listening, meant that someone high up at Crestwell was nervous. Or, and this was the thought that made my blood run cold, someone high up was pushing for it. I looked at the screen. Scrolling past the financial tables I had shown Noah, I went deeper into the qualitative analysis section. I needed to understand the landscape before I fired the first shot. "We are waiting on your assessment." "Evelyn," Robert prompted, "the borrower is citing weather delays and supply chain disruptions for the liquidity crunch. Standard excuses. Do you see anything in the data that contradicts that?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Outside the glass door, Kyle was still pacing. He had stopped looking at the house. He was now looking at the sky, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked like a man waiting for a reprieve from the governor. "One moment, Robert," I said, my voice steady. "I am verifying a discrepancy in the guarantor schedule." I wasn't verifying a discrepancy. I was connecting the dots. For the last 3 weeks, a senior partner at Crestwell, a man named Arthur Sterling, who played golf at the same club Kyle was desperate to join, had been stopping by my desk. He would lean against the doorframe, swirling his coffee, asking how things were going with the Midwest portfolio. He would drop subtle hints. "We need to be flexible with the local developers. Evelyn, we need to build relationships. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story. Let's not be too rigid." I had brushed it off as standard executive pressure. Salespeople always want to lend. Risk people always want to withhold. That is the eternal friction of the business. But now, looking at the legal on standby warning, I realized it wasn't just pressure, it was a directive. Arthur Sterling had likely promised Kyle this extension would go through. He had likely told Kyle that the little lady in risk would fall in line, because that is what good soldiers do. Kyle's arrogance outside, the pencil, the insults, the absolute certainty that he could humiliate my family and suffer no consequences, wasn't just personality, it was backed by the belief that he had fixed the game. He thought he had gone over my head. I felt a surge of anger so potent it almost made my hands shake, but I clamped it down. Anger is useless in a credit committee. Anger gets you dismissed as emotional. If I wanted to stop this, I couldn't be the vengeful sister-in-law. I had to be the objective firewall. We lend money to projects, I whispered to myself, a mantra I used when the pressure got high. But we bet on people. I scrolled down to the bottom of the PDF to a section titled Character References and Professional Affiliations. It was a standard boilerplate section, usually filled with the names of local politicians or other developers who could vouch for the borrower's standing. I scanned the list. Reference 1, Arthur Sterling, Senior Partner, Crestwell Capital. No surprise there. That explained the pressure. Reference 2, Mayor Thomas Goyle, Standard name dropping. Reference 3. My breath stopped. I stared at the screen, blinking to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. There, in black and white, listed as a professional reference and financial advisor for the Maddox Ridge development, was a name I knew very well. Evelyn Sanders, Senior Risk Officer, Crestwell Capital. I felt the room tilt. He had listed me. He had listed me as a reference on a loan application that I was currently reviewing. He hadn't asked me. He hadn't told me. He had just assumed that because we shared a surname and a Thanksgiving table, he could use my professional reputation as collateral for his failing business. This was not just a conflict of interest. It was a violation of every compliance protocol in the book. If this loan went through and then defaulted, which it absolutely would, the audit trail would show that Evelyn Sanders approved a loan for her brother-in-law. A man who listed her as an advisor. It would look like collusion. It would look like fraud. Kyle Maddox wasn't just trying to steal $62 million from my bank. He was unknowingly framing me as his accomplice. I looked up at Noah. He was watching me closely. He saw the color drain from my face. He saw the way my jaw set. "What is it?" he whispered. I turned the screen toward him, pointing at my name on the document. "He used me," I said softly, my hand covering the microphone of my headset. "He put my name on the file. If I approve this, and it goes bust, I lose my license. I lose my career." Noah stared at the name. He understood immediately. The look of disgust on his face deepened. "He is trying to drag you down with him," Noah said. "He doesn't even know he is doing it," I said. "He is so entitled he thinks my career is just another asset he can borrow against. He thinks my job is to serve him." I looked back at the patio. Kyle was still there, oblivious. He thought he was fighting for an extension. He didn't realize he had just handed me the weapon to execute him. I had a choice. I could recuse myself. I could tell Robert, "I have a family conflict," and step off the call. If I did that, the committee might approve the extension based on Arthur Sterling's pressure. Kyle would get his money. The fraud would continue for another 3 months until the inevitable collapse. My hands would be clean. Technically, but my conscience would be stained. And my name would still be on that file when the investigators came looking. Or I could stay on the line. I could do my job. I could protect the bank, protect my reputation, and protect the unsuspecting homebuyers who were about to put deposits down on condos that would never be built. I looked at the pencil on the table. "This is all you deserve." Kyle was right. We get what we deserve, and he deserved the truth. I took my hand off the microphone. "Evelyn?" Robert's voice was sharper now. "We need a response. The committee is waiting." "I am here." "Robert," I said. My voice was different now. It was no longer the voice of a woman reviewing a file. It was the voice of a woman defending her existence. "I am looking at the character reference section of the application. Page 42. "I see it," Robert said. Paper rustled on the other end of the line. "He lists you as a reference. I assumed that was disclosed? He is family, correct?" "He is my brother-in-law," I said clearly. "However, I want to state for the record, and I want legal to note this, that I was never asked to be a reference. I never consented to be a reference, and I have never acted as a financial advisor to Mr. Maddox or the Maddox Ridge project." The silence on the line was instantaneous and profound. In the corporate world, this is the sound of a bomb going off. Accusing a borrower of falsifying a reference, especially an internal one, is a nuclear option. Are you stating that the borrower falsified the application? Robert asked, his voice dropping an octave. I am stating that the borrower misrepresented his relationship with Crestwell Risk Management to secure leverage, I said. And if he is willing to lie about something as easily verifiable as a reference, we must question the integrity of every other number in this file. Agreed, Robert said. The impatience was gone, replaced by the cold, predatory focus of a bank protecting its assets. Proceed with your assessment, Evelyn. Thank you, I said. I looked at the screen. I needed more than just the reference. That was the hook. But I needed the net. I needed to prove the fraud wasn't just social. I needed to prove it was financial. I opened my secure chat window with Mara. Evelyn. Mara, listen to me closely. Mara, I am here. Evelyn, I need you to pull the raw vendor payment trail for Maddox Ridge, not the summary PDF he sent us. I want the direct Swift wire logs from the construction draw account. Mara, that takes time to decrypt. We usually need a subpoena for the raw wires. Evelyn, we don't need a subpoena. We hold the primary deposit account. It is our data. Go into the back end. Pull the last 90 days. Mara, Evelyn, if I do that without a formal audit request. Evelyn, do it. Arthur Sterling is pushing this. If we are wrong, I will take the heat. But if I am right, we are saving the firm $62 million. Trust me. I watched the 3 dots of the typing indicator bubble on the screen. Noah watched them too. Mara, on it. Give me 2 minutes. Evelyn, Robert said, while you are reviewing, Arthur Sterling has sent a note to the committee emphasizing the strategic importance of this relationship. He suggests that the liquidity issues are temporary. Arthur is looking at the relationship, I said, my voice cool. I am looking at the risk. And frankly, Robert, the risk is not just financial, it is reputational. I glanced out the window. Kyle was now talking to Jenna. He was gesturing wildly, pointing at the house. He was probably telling her that I was in here fixing everything. He was probably telling her that he had handled me. Jenna looked miserable. She was hugging herself, looking small and defeated. She was the collateral damage in all of this. If I blew this up, her life would implode too. The house would go. The status would go. But if I didn't blow it up, the fall would be harder later. It would be a felony later. Right now, it was just bankruptcy. Bankruptcy you can recover from. Prison, less so. I was doing this for her, too. Even if she would hate me for it for the next 10 years. I am framing this decision, I said to the committee, not on the potential of the project, but on the integrity of the borrower. We lend money to projects, but we bet on people. And right now, the person asking for this money has demonstrated a pattern of obfuscation that rises to the level of gross negligence. Strong words, a voice from legal chimed in. It was the first time they had spoken. Do you have documentation to support gross negligence? I am waiting on the wire confirms now, I said. The chat window pinged. Mara. Got it. Sending the file now. You are going to want to sit down for this. I was already sitting. Mara. Look at the beneficiary on the wires for Apex Supply. I opened the file Mara sent. It was a raw data dump. Rows and rows of transaction codes. I filtered for Apex. There were 3 payments of $150,000 each. I looked at the beneficiary bank account details. Usually, a supply company has a commercial account at a major bank. Apex Supply did not. The wires were going to a small regional credit union in Florida, and the account holder wasn't Apex Supply Incorporated. The account holder was Maddox Holdings, LLC. Kyle wasn't paying a supplier. He was paying himself. He was funneling the construction loan out of the project and into a shell company he controlled. It was embezzlement, pure and simple. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anxiety vanished. The fear vanished. When you have the truth in your hand, you don't need to be afraid. You just need to be accurate. I have the documentation, I said to the committee. I am looking at the wire trail for the last 90 days. And? Robert asked. And I said, looking at Noah, who was watching me with wide, awestruck eyes. The borrower is diverting loan proceeds to a personal holding company. He is stripping the asset. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the line. Are you certain? Robert asked. I am looking at the account numbers, I said. Apex Supply is a shell. The money is gone. Robert, it is not in the building. It is in his pocket. Upload the file, Robert ordered. His voice was like ice. Now. I hit the upload button. Sent, I said. Outside, the sun was still shining. The guests were still drinking. Kyle was still hoping, but inside the machine of Crestwell Capital, the gears had just ground to a halt. The controversial file was no longer a debate. It was a crime scene. Noah looked at me. He whispered one word. Checkmate. I nodded. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about the pencil. It was about the fact that Kyle Maddox had mistaken my silence for weakness, and my professionalism for subservience. He had thought he could use me. He was about to find out that I was the one thing he couldn't afford, a woman who did her job. The upload bar on my screen hit 100%. The file, Maddox_wire_trace_Q1, was now in the hands of the committee. I muted my microphone again as Robert Vance and the legal team began their silent, ravenous review of the data. I exhaled, a long breath that shuddered slightly on the way out. The adrenaline was still high, but the nature of it had changed. The hunt was over. Now it was just the kill. Suddenly, a frantic knocking on the glass door shattered the quiet. I spun around. It wasn't Kyle. It was Jenna. Her face was pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and panic-stricken. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had been straightening napkins an hour ago. I unlocked the door and slid it open. Jenna stumbled in, bringing a gust of humid air and the smell of fear with her. She closed the door quickly, leaning her back against it as if she were trying to hold back a flood. "He is outside freaking out," she gasped. Her voice was shaking, trembling so hard the words were barely coherent. Mascara had streaked down her cheeks in jagged black lines, ruining the perfect facade she had spent all morning constructing. "Evelyn, he is saying things. He is saying you are trying to destroy us." She looked at me, then at Noah, then at the laptop on the island. "Are you?" she whispered. "Are you destroying us?" "I am stopping him, Jenna," I said, keeping my voice low. "There is a difference." "He says the bank called," Jenna said, wringing her hands. "He says his login is locked. He can't access the accounts." "That is standard procedure during a fraud investigation," I said. The word hung in the air. Fraud. Jenna flinched. She squeezed her eyes shut, and fresh tears spilled over. "I knew it," she sobbed. Her legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands. "God, I knew it." I walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. The fabric of her expensive dress was damp with sweat. "What did you know, Jenna?" I asked gently. She looked up, her face ravaged. "I knew it was failing," she admitted. The confession came out in a rush, like water breaking a dam. "I have known for months, since Christmas. He stopped sleeping. He started drinking at noon. He kept telling everyone how great things were, giving those big speeches about the empire, but I saw the letters, the overdue notices." She took a ragged breath. "He told me it was just a cash flow thing," she said. "He said it happens to all the big developers. Trump, Musk. He said he just needed to move some money around." "And you believed him?" I asked. "I wanted to," she whispered. "Evelyn, you know how he is. If I ask questions, he yells. If I doubt him, I am unsupportive. It is easier to just nod, to just smile and hope he fixes it." I looked at Noah. He was watching his aunt with an expression of profound sadness. He knew that dynamic. He had lived in the shadow of Kyle's big personality his entire life. He knew the cost of keeping the peace. "Jenna," I said, my voice turning serious. "This is important. Did you sign anything?" She went still. The color drained from her face completely. "He brought some papers home." She stammered. "In March, he said the bank needed a spousal consent form, just a formality, because the house is in both our names." "Did you read it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He was rushing me," she said, her voice rising in panic. "We were late for dinner. He said, 'Just sign it. Jenna, do you want us to lose the deal?' So I signed it." My heart sank. It wasn't just a spousal consent form. It was almost certainly a personal guarantee. Unlimited liability. "Jenna," I said, gripping her shoulders, "you likely signed a guarantee that puts you on the hook for the debt, if the project fails. They don't just take the development. They take this house. They take your savings. They take everything." Jenna let out a low moan, a sound of pure despair. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "He used you," I said. "Just like he used me. He leveraged everything he had, his wife, his sister-in-law, his reputation, to keep his lie afloat." "I am so sorry." Jenna wept. She looked at Noah. "Noah, I am so sorry. About the pencil. About everything." She wiped her eyes, smearing the makeup further. "I laughed," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I laughed when he made fun of you. I did it because if he was making fun of you, he wasn't yelling at me. It was cowardly. I know it was cowardly." It was a brutal admission. She had used my son as a human shield. Noah stood up. He walked over to his aunt. For a second, I thought he might yell. I thought he might finally unleash the anger he was entitled to feel. But Noah was not Kyle. He reached out and wrapped his arms around her. He hugged her, awkwardly at first, then tightly. "It is okay, Aunt Jenna," Noah said softly. "I know." He was the adult in the room. He was the one offering comfort to the woman who had failed to protect him, because he understood that she was a victim too. He had learned, through years of silent observation, that weakness often masquerades as cruelty. Jenna clung to him, sobbing into his graduation gown. I watched them, and I made a decision. I could not save Kyle. Kyle was past saving, but I could try to save my sister. "Jenna," I said, my voice sharp. "Listen to me. I need you to focus. I can't stop the default. The loan is dead, but I might be able to carve you out of the liability if we act now." She pulled back from Noah, sniffing. "How?" "I need proof that you signed under duress," I said. "Or proof that he misrepresented the document to you. But more importantly, I need proof that the fraud was his alone. If we can prove he was acting outside the scope of the partnership, acting criminally, we might be able to argue that the guarantee is voidable." Jenna nodded, wiping her face. Her eyes darted around the room, then settled on her clutch bag on the counter. "There is something else," she said. She opened her bag and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. "His partner," Jenna said. "Dave? You know Dave?" "The silent partner." I nodded. "He isn't silent anymore," Jenna said. "He has been texting me. He is threatening to go to the police. He says Kyle has been stealing from the partnership account." "He has," I confirmed. "I saw the wires. He is funneling money to a shell company." "Dave sent me the emails," Jenna said. "He wanted me to see them so I would talk sense into Kyle. He has been documenting everything." She tapped the screen and held the phone out to me. "Look," she said. I took the phone. It was an email chain between Kyle and Dave. "Dave, Kyle, the numbers don't add up. You pulled $150,000 for supplies, but the site manager says no delivery came. Where is the money?" Kyle, "Relax. Dave, it is a deposit. Vendor required it up front. Stop micromanaging." Dave, "I called the vendor. They never heard of us." Kyle, "If you are using this to pay off the gambling debts, I swear to God, gambling debts. The piece of the puzzle I was missing clicked into place. It wasn't just lifestyle inflation. It wasn't just the platinum catering package. It was gambling, the desperation, the mood swings, the need for the big win, the risk-taking behavior. It all fit. "He has a problem," Jenna whispered. "Online sports betting, poker. He lost $50,000 on the Super Bowl. He told me he would win it back. And he tried to win it back with the bank's money," I said. This was the smoking gun. Not just incompetence, but intent. He was stealing loan proceeds to cover personal gambling losses. "Jenna," I said, "I need you to forward this email to me, right now." "But," she hesitated, "if I do that, he goes to jail, doesn't he?" "He is going to jail regardless, Jenna," I said firmly. "The bank will find this. The forensic accountants will find this. But if you give it to me now, you are a whistleblower. You are cooperating. That separates you from him. That saves your house." She looked at the phone. She looked at the door where her husband was standing. She made her choice. "What is your email?" she asked. "EvelynSanders@crestwell.com." I said. She typed it in. She hit send. A moment later, my laptop pinged. I looked at the screen. Subject: FWD. "Where's the money? Urgent." I had it. I had the proof that Kyle Maddox wasn't just a bad businessman. He was a thief. And I had the proof that Jenna was a victim, not an accomplice. "You did the right thing," I told her. "It doesn't feel like it," she whispered. "I feel like I'm betraying him." "He betrayed you the moment he signed your name to a guarantee to cover his bets," I said. My earpiece crackled. "Evelyn," Robert Vance said, "we have reviewed the wire trace. This is egregious. We are moving to immediate default. Legal is preparing the notice now. We need to discuss the guarantor." "Robert," I said, stepping back to the island, "I have just received additional documentation from a whistleblower close to the principal. It appears the funds were diverted to cover personal gambling debts. I am uploading the email chain now." "Gambling?" Robert sighed. "Of course. It is always gambling. Furthermore," I added, glancing at Jenna, "the whistleblower indicates that the spousal guarantee may have been obtained through coercion and misrepresentation. I recommend we bifurcate the enforcement actions. Go after the principal, but hold on the spousal assets until we can depose her." "Noted," Robert said. "If she cooperates, we can discuss leniency. But the principal is done. We are freezing everything, now." "Understood," I said. I looked at Noah. He was holding Jenna's hand. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a deep, profound relief. We weren't just winning, we were cleaning the wound. "It is over," I mouthed to them. But outside, Kyle Maddox still didn't know. He was still pounding on the glass of his own life, unaware that the lock had been changed from the inside. The committee chair, Robert Vance, announced a 5-minute recess. The legal team needed a moment to verify the swift wire codes I had uploaded. And to cross-reference the gambling debts with the bank's risk database, the line went silent, replaced by the soft, rhythmic hold music that sounded bizarrely calm given the carnage taking place on the digital ledger. "I need air," I whispered to Noah. "Just for a minute. Keep the door locked." Noah nodded, moving to stand guard by the sliding glass panel. He looked like a sentry in a graduation gown. Jenna was still sitting at the table, her head in her hands, scrolling through the texts from the silent partner, gathering the ammunition we would need to save her from her husband's wreckage. I stepped out the side door of the kitchen, the one that led to the mudroom and then the driveway. Circling back to the patio, I needed to see the blast radius. I needed to look the enemy in the eye one last time before I delivered the final stroke. The atmosphere in the backyard had decomposed. An hour ago, it had been a celebration of excess, loud music, flowing alcohol, the performative joy of a family pretending to be royalty. Now, it felt like a wake where no one could find the body. The music had been turned off. The humid air was thick with the murmur of confused, anxious conversations. The relatives were still there, but the groupings had changed. They were no longer orbiting Kyle. They were huddled in tight, defensive knots near the fence and the buffet tables. As I walked onto the patio, the conversation closest to me died instantly. Aunt Linda looked at me, then immediately looked down at her wedge sandals. Finding a sudden fascination with the grass stains, Uncle Mike, who had laughed the loudest at the pencil boy comment, turned his back to me. Pretending to fish for a drink in a cooler that I knew was empty, guilt is a contagious disease in my family. It spreads faster than the flu. They didn't know the specifics. They didn't know about the wire transfers or the gambling, but they knew the power dynamic had inverted. They had bet on the wrong horse. And now they were terrified of the jockey. I didn't look at them. I was looking for Kyle. I found him near the trellis, partially obscured by the overgrown wisteria he kept meaning to pay someone to trim. He wasn't alone. He was with Cousin Mark, the one who had clapped like a seal during Noah's humiliation. They were heads together, whispering frantically. Mark looked pale, his usually ruddy complexion specifically drained of color. Kyle looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting toward the house, then the driveway, then back to his phone. When Kyle saw me, he broke away from Mark. He didn't shout this time. He didn't posture for an audience. The charm was gone. The salesman was gone. All that was left was the thug. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, cornering me against the brick wall of the garage. It was a secluded spot, out of the direct line of sight of the party guests. He wanted privacy. He wanted to use the one tool he had left: fear. "You think you are smart?" Kyle hissed, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He was close enough that I could smell the stale scotch and the metallic tang of adrenaline. "You think you can just walk into my house, eat my food, and then log onto your little computer and torch my life?" "I am not torching your life, Kyle," I said, my voice steady, matching the coolness of the air-conditioned kitchen I had just left. "I am auditing it." "You are dead," he spat. "Professionally dead. You think I don't have friends? You think Arthur Sterling is the only guy I know at Crestwell? I have connections. Evelyn, real connections. Men who play poker with the CEO. I will have you fired for harassment. I will have you blacklisted from every financial institution in Ohio." He leaned in, his hand slamming against the brick wall next to my head. It was a calculated move, designed to make me flinch, to make me shrink. "I will spread rumors about you," he threatened, his eyes wild. "I will say you are unstable. I will say you have a vendetta because I made a joke about your kid. I will say you are emotional." Who are they going to believe? The successful developer? Or the bitter single mother who can't take a joke? I looked at his hand on the wall. Then I looked at his face. Threatening the risk officer during an active credit review is a choice. I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I let the sentence hang there, stripping the power from his physical intimidation. "And as for being emotional," I continued, "that is a very specific word to use. Kyle, it sounds almost rehearsed." My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a text from Mara. I lifted the phone, not breaking eye contact with him. "You might want to check your own connections before you threaten mine," I said. I looked down at the screen. Mara had come through. She had dug deeper into the Apex Supply shell company. She had run a skip trace on the registered agent and the mailbox address. "Mara, you are not going to believe this. The registered agent for Apex Supply isn't Kyle. It is a Mark D. Sanders. Address matches the cousin you mentioned, and Evelyn looking at the ownership structure. Mark isn't just a signature. He is taking a 10% cut of the diverted funds." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with fear. It was the chill of absolute clarity. I looked past Kyle to where Cousin Mark was standing by the trellis. Mark was watching us, terror written on his face. He wasn't just a spectator laughing at a cruel joke. He was an accomplice. The laugh, the applause, the way Mark had egged Kyle on during the pencil speech. It wasn't just family dynamic. It was a partnership. Mark was laughing because he was getting paid. Every time Kyle stole from the project, Mark got his 10% tithe. They were looting the bank together, and they were bonding over the destruction of my son's confidence. "Apex Supply," I said. reading the text aloud. Registered agent, Mark Sanders. Kyle went rigid, his jaw locked. You didn't just steal the money, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a verdict. You laundered it through the family. You dragged Mark into this. Does his wife know? Does she know he is facing federal conspiracy charges because you needed a fake vendor to cover your gambling losses? Kyle pulled his hand back from the wall, as if the bricks had suddenly turned red hot. It is complex, Kyle stammered. It is a bridge loan structure. You don't understand the nuance. I understand theft, I said. And I understand racketeering. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Mara. This one was different. It was a forwarded alert from the internal legal server. Mara. Update from legal. They just pinged me. Apparently, they already had an open inquiry on Maddox Ridge. Case file opened in February. They flagged the high volume of cash withdrawals but couldn't prove the destination. They were waiting for one more piece of evidence to pull the trigger. You just gave them the smoking gun. I stared at the screen. The legal team hadn't been on standby because of me. They had been on standby because they were already hunting him. They knew something was wrong. They had been watching the account bleed for months, waiting for the mistake that would link the cash to the fraud. And then it hit me. The realization was so sharp, it almost knocked the wind out of me. The pencil, the public humiliation, the insults. You knew, I whispered, looking at Kyle with a new, horrified appreciation for his tactical mind. He blinked, confused by the shift in my tone. What? You knew legal was sniffing around, I said. You felt the pressure. You knew you were close to getting caught. I stepped closer to him, forcing him to be the one to retreat. That is why you did it, I said. The pencil, the scene, the abuse. You weren't just being a jerk. Kyle, you were trying to provoke me. He stayed silent, but his eyes widened. I had found the nerve. You wanted me to scream, I said, putting the pieces together. You wanted me to slap you. You wanted me to cause a scene in front of 50 witnesses, because if I did that, if I became the hysterical sister-in-law, you could call Arthur Sterling and say, "Look, she is biased. She is crazy. You have to remove her from the file." You wanted to force a recusal. If I had reacted emotionally, if I had defended Noah with anger instead of cold. Hard paperwork. I would have been pulled off the review. A new risk officer would have been assigned. Someone who didn't know the family history. Someone Arthur Sterling could bully. Someone who might have signed the extension just to clear the desk. He had tried to use my love for my son as a weapon to save his own skin. He had gambled that I was just a mother, not a professional. You bet against the wrong asset, I said. Kyle looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the total collapse of his ego. The strategy had failed. The intimidation had failed. The connections had failed. He looked over at Mark, who was now actively backing away toward the gate, looking like he was about to make a run for it. Mark isn't going to save you, I said, and Arthur isn't going to save you. Arthur is going to pretend he barely knows you the minute the subpoena lands on his desk. I checked the time on my phone. 1 minute left in the recess, I said. The committee is reconvening. We are going to vote. Evelyn, please, Kyle begged. His voice broke. Tears, real, terrified tears, welled in his eyes. He grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. I will lose the house. Jenna, she will have nowhere to go. I looked at his hand on my arm. I looked at it with the same detachment I would look at a stain on a spreadsheet. Let go of me, I said. He let go. Jenna is going to be fine, I said, because I am going to protect her. I am going to make sure the bank knows she was a victim of your coercion. I am going to save her from you. I turned away from him. And Noah? I added, pausing with my back to him. He is going to Princeton, on a full scholarship. He doesn't need your advice, and he certainly doesn't need your pencil. I started walking. I walked past Mark, who flinched as if I were holding a knife. I walked past Aunt Linda, who was now frantically scrubbing a stain on the tablecloth that didn't exist. I walked past the empty buffet trays and the melting ice sculptures. I walked toward the kitchen door with the rhythm of a metronome. Inside, I could see Noah standing guard. He saw me coming. He unlocked the door and slid it open. I stepped into the cool air. 5 minutes are up, Noah said. Yes, I said. They are. I walked to the island. I sat down. I put my headset back on. I looked at the screen. The voting buttons were illuminated. Approve, deny, refer to legal. But there was a fourth option, one that was rarely used. One that was reserved for cases of absolute, irrefutable toxicity. Accelerate and demand. It meant calling the entire loan due immediately. It meant seizing the accounts. It meant sending the sheriffs. Evelyn? Robert Vance's voice came back on the line. We are back. Legal has reviewed the upload. The findings are conclusive. We are ready for your final recommendation. I looked at the pencil sitting on the granite counter. I reached out and picked it up. It felt light, insignificant. I thought about the last 4 years. I thought about the participation trophy comments. I thought about the way my family had laughed. And I thought about Kyle, standing outside in the heat, thinking he could outsmart the truth. I held the pencil in both hands. My recommendation, I said into the microphone. I snapped the pencil in half. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. Accelerate and demand, I said. Liquidation, immediate. The digital hum of the conference line was the only sound in the kitchen. The air conditioning vent rattled softly, a stark contrast to the humidity and the hysteria that was consuming the backyard just a few feet away. I sat at the island, my posture rigid, my headset adjusting to the frequency of the boardroom in Manhattan. This was the room where family did not matter. In this room, bloodlines were irrelevant, and emotional pleas were treated as inefficiencies. This was the room of cold, hard capital, governed by the ruthless arithmetic of risk and return. The committee is in session, Robert Vance said. His voice was stripped of the casual familiarity he had used earlier. It was formal, recorded, and final. We are reviewing the Maddox Ridge facility. File 704 Bravo, Evelyn Sanders, Senior Risk Officer. You have the floor. I took a breath. I looked at the screen where the columns of numbers stood like tombstones for Kyle's career. Thank you. Robert, I said. My voice was calm, distinct, and devoid of the trembling anger I had felt on the patio. Based on the expedited review of the vendor payment trails and the supplementary documentation provided regarding the guarantor, the risk management position has shifted from monitor to critical failure. I laid out the facts. I did not embellish. I did not use adjectives. I used verbs and integers. 1, I listed, ticking the point off on my finger. The borrower has manipulated cash flow projections to mask a liquidity crisis that has existed for at least 4 months. The revised forecast submitted last week is statistically impossible given current pre-sale absorption rates. Noted, Robert said. The scratching of digital pens on tablets was audible on the line. 2, I continued. We have confirmed evidence of diverted loan proceeds. 3 separate wire transfers totaling $450,000 were sent to Apex Supply, a shell entity with no commercial footprint. Registered to a family member of the principal, these funds were not used for construction. Fraud, the general counsel muttered on the line. That is a direct breach of the covenants. 3, I said, delivering the final blow. We have received credible internal communication, emails from the borrower to a minority partner, admitting that these funds were used to service personal gambling debts incurred by the principal. The silence on the line was profound. Gambling is the third rail of lending. You can survive a bad market. You can survive a labor strike. You cannot survive a borrower who bets the construction draw on the Super Bowl. The integrity of the borrower is non-existent, I concluded. The collateral is being actively stripped, and the guarantees are compromised by potential coercion. Robert Vance cleared his throat. It was a dry, judicial sound. Thank you. Evelyn, he said. That is comprehensive and devastating. He paused. Recommendation? He asked. It was the question that Kyle had been dreading. The question that would decide whether his house of cards stood for another week or collapsed into the dust. I looked up. Noah was standing by the refrigerator. He had taken off his graduation cap. He was holding a glass of water, watching me. He looked older than 18. He looked like a young man who had just learned that heroes are rare, but survivors are necessary. I looked down at the granite countertop. The yellow pencil Kyle had given Noah, the symbol of his generosity, the tool he had used to carve my son's confidence into shavings, lay there. I had snapped it in the heat of the moment, and the two jagged halves lay crossed like an X. It was a small object, just wood and graphite, but it carried the weight of 18 years of insults. It carried the weight of every time Kyle had made us feel small so he could feel big. I touched the broken wood. Recommendation, I said, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. Extension denied. I didn't stop there. I further recommend we trigger the acceleration clause immediately, I said. Demand full repayment of the principal and interest, freeze the operating accounts, appoint a receiver to take control of the physical asset before close of business today. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was risk. This was truth. This was the inevitable result of a man thinking he could outrun the math. I second the motion, the general counsel said instantly. All in favor? Robert asked. Aye, came the chorus of 4 powerful voices. Opposed? Silence. The motion carries, Robert said. Legal, issue the notices. Operations, lock the accounts. Evelyn, good work. That was a close call. Thank you, Robert, I said. Disconnecting now. I tapped the red button on the screen. The connection severed. The formal voices vanished. I took the headset off and set it on the table. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, but it wasn't the heaviness of dread. It was the heaviness of a storm that has finally broken. It is done? Noah asked quietly. It is done, I said. The emails are going out now. His accounts will be locked in less than 2 minutes. As if on cue, a sound pierced the quiet of the house. It wasn't a scream, it was a ringtone. Through the glass door, I saw Kyle stop pacing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen. He didn't recognize the number. It was likely the automated notification from the bank's fraud department, but he answered it anyway. I watched his face. I saw the exact moment the words hit him. Acceleration, demand, receiver appointed. His face went slack. The color vanished, leaving him a gray, sickly shade. He staggered back a step, almost tripping over a patio chair. The phone slipped from his fingers and fell onto the grass. He didn't pick it up. He just stared at the air, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto a dock. His empire, the one built on loud voices and shiny suits, was collapsing in real time. Cousin Mark, sensing the shift, walked over to him. Kyle said something. 1 word, maybe 2. Mark's face went white. He backed away, turning and walking fast toward the gate, leaving his beer bottle on a table. The rats were fleeing the ship. Jenna was standing next to Noah now. She watched her husband crumble, and she didn't move to help him. She couldn't help him. What happens to me? She whispered. I stood up and walked over to my sister. I took her hands. They were cold. I spoke to legal on a sidebar chat. I told her. Because you provided the gambling emails, and because we can prove he coerced you into the guarantee without legal counsel present, they are agreeing to a carve-out. Jenna blinked, tears leaking from her eyes. A carve-out? They are going after him, I said. They are going after his shell companies. They are going after the partnership. But they are going to release the lien on your personal savings, and they are going to give you 6 months to negotiate on the house before they move to foreclose. You have time, Jenna. You have a lifeboat. She let out a sob that sounded like a laugh. He is going to be so angry. He doesn't get to be angry anymore, I said firmly. He lost that right when he stole from you. I turned back to the island. I picked up the 2 halves of the yellow pencil. I walked over to the trash can. I held the pieces over the bin. Noah watched me. He stepped forward. "Wait," he said. He reached out and took the broken pieces from my hand. He held them for a second, looking at the jagged wood where the snap had occurred. It wasn't a sad look. It was the look of someone examining a shackle they had just cut off. "We are done letting them define you," I said to him. Noah nodded. He dropped the pieces into the trash. They hit the bottom with a final, hollow thud. "Yeah," Noah said. "We are." He looked at the patio door one last time. Kyle was sitting on the ground now, his head in his hands, completely alone. The party guests were awkwardly shuffling toward the exit, realizing the free drinks were over and the show had taken a turn they didn't want to watch. "Do you want to stay?" I asked Noah. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Noah shook his head. "I already said goodbye when he handed me that pencil." He grabbed his car keys from the counter. "Let's go." "Mom," he said, "I am starving." We walked out the front door, bypassing the backyard entirely. We didn't look back at the white linens or the dying flowers. We walked to my Volvo, the car I had paid for with my own money, the car that Kyle had called a soccer mom mobile. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, letting the air conditioning wash away the humidity of the afternoon. We drove past the manicured lawns of the suburbs, past the country club Kyle would never join, and turned onto the highway. We ended up at a pizza place on the other side of town, a place with red vinyl booths, sticky tables, and the smell of yeast and garlic. It wasn't the platinum catering package, it was better. We ordered a large pepperoni and 2 sodas. When the pizza came, Noah took a bite, closed his eyes, and sighed. "Better than shrimp?" I asked. "Better than everything," he said. He wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. He opened the email from Princeton. "I was thinking," Noah said, his voice hesitant but growing stronger, "about the essay, the one I wrote for the application." "The one you wouldn't let me read?" I teased gently. "Yeah," he smiled. "I wrote about observing. I wrote about how being the quiet one in a loud room teaches you how to listen, and how listening teaches you how to see the cracks in the walls before the building falls down." I stopped chewing. I looked at my son. "You wrote about them," I realized. "I wrote about survival," Noah corrected. "And I wrote about you." My throat tightened. "Me?" "I wrote that my mother taught me that the loudest voice isn't the strongest one," Noah said. "And that dignity is something you build yourself, brick by brick, even when people are trying to knock it down." He looked at me, his dark eyes clear and bright. "I am going to study economics, Mom," he said, "and creative writing. I want to tell stories, but I want to understand the numbers. Too, I want to be able to do what you did today." "You don't want to do what I did today," I said, reaching across the sticky table to squeeze his hand. "Today was a tragedy, Noah, necessary, but tragic." "Maybe," Noah said, "but it was also justice." He took another slice of pizza. "To justice," he said, raising his soda cup. I raised mine. The plastic cups clinked together, a sound far more satisfying than the crystal glasses in Kyle's backyard. "To justice," I agreed. "And to Princeton. And to no more pencils." Noah laughed. We sat there for 2 hours, talking, not about family drama, not about debts, but about the future, about dorm rooms and meal plans and train schedules. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't listening to him through the filter of protecting him from his uncle's judgment. I was just listening to him, and he was brilliant. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the parking lot. Kyle Maddox's empire had fallen. The creditors were circling. The lawyers were drafting the papers. The silence of the suburbs was about to be broken by the reality of consequence. But in here, in this booth, my world was perfectly intact. My son was safe, my sister was free, and I was exactly who I needed to be. The woman who paid the bill. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Evelyn and Noah as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Are you tuning in from New York, London, Sydney, or somewhere else? Let's get a conversation going in the comments section about justice, family, and standing up for yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Kate Revenge Stories for more dramas like this one. Don't forget to hit the like button and press that hype button to help this story get discovered by more people. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep bringing these stories to life. Thank you.